Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, August 15th, 2023, and today we're going to be talking about the 2024 Senate elections and the blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that the Democratic Party is slowly starting to maintain and lock down ahead of the upcoming Senate elections. Now, the 2022 midterm elections were not super strong for the Republican Party when it came down to the Rust Belt elections. I made this video talking about it back in 2022, saying that Democrats will likely build back the blue wall in 2022. Then came the elections, and the narrative was that this was a fluke election with Tudor Dixon in the state of Michigan, Tim Michels in the state of Wisconsin, and Doug Mastriano in the state of Pennsylvania. These were all avoidable losses by the Republican Party that could have been preempted had they had a different nominee in the race. Now, the argument was, too, that 2024 was going to be a different type of year. With Donald Trump potentially on the ballot, the Republicans argued that it was going to be a better year for the GOP, given the down-ballot benefit that Republicans had in the 2020 presidential election. But what we've been seeing on the side of the Pennsylvania Senate race, on the Wisconsin Senate race, on the Michigan Senate race, is that the Republican Party is scrambling. They're scrambling to find candidates in many of these key, very important races, and ultimately it shows and displays weakness amongst a mainstream party that otherwise would have had a much bigger shot at these races had they won some earlier elections. Now, the main focus of this video will be on the state of Pennsylvania, largely because of recent developments that have come out of the state surrounding Dave McCormick, the potential Republican nominee for Senate in the state of Pennsylvania, who has yet to announce his bid, as Republicans, again using this word, are scrambling to find a Senate candidate against a very popular incumbent, Senator Bob Casey. Now, the Pennsylvania Senate race is one that Republicans have been hoping would be competitive for quite some time, but historically hasn't been super competitive. When Bob Casey was first elected back in 2006, he won with 59% of the vote against incumbent Republican Rick Santorum. In 2012, Bob Casey won 54% to 45%, an 8-point victory alongside a presidential margin that was slightly less than what Bob Casey ultimately had. And 2 years after Donald Trump flipped the state of Pennsylvania for the first time in nearly 3 decades, he won by double digits by 13 points against Lou Barletta, who at the time was a well-recognizable figure within the state of Pennsylvania, who explored a bid for governor in 2022, ran, lost, and now is potentially a 2024 candidate. But Dave McCormick, as I mentioned previously, seems to be the mainstream guy. But regardless of Dave McCormick, there are already some early signs that Dave McCormick won't be performing as strongly as Republicans will have hoped. You see, Dave McCormick is facing off against, as I said, a very popular incumbent. Bob Casey has a name that is recognizable across the state of Pennsylvania for its political dynasty. As Politico notes, the Casey name is near royalty in the Keystone State. And that's right, because Bob Casey has maintained a level of popularity that those before him in his family have also been able to maintain. As a Democratic powerhouse family, Bob Casey has served in the United States Senate for over a decade and potentially will win re-election, as he has announced that he intends to seek it. Now, Dave McCormick comes into this place as a candidate from 2022 who ran against Dr. Oz and lost the Republican primary by just under 1,000 votes. Out of 1.3 million cast, Dave McCormick did not become the Republican nominee because of a few hundred more votes that went to Dr. Oz over him, largely due to Donald Trump's endorsement of Dr. Oz. And again, that brings us back to that argument, the argument that if Donald Trump had not had heavy influence on the Republican primary race, Republicans would have performed a lot better. But ultimately, he did have that influence and did prop up Dr. Oz to this victory to a point where even Donald Trump mocked Dave McCormick when it came down to the primary race. Now, the Republicans nationally are hoping that Dave McCormick does not face off against any opposition. But on my side, I think some opposition would be good. Better opposition would be good, rather. The Republican Party doesn't exactly have a long bench of people to pull from, with Kathy Barnett announcing that she's not going to be running for United States Senate, and the 2022 governor nominee, Doug Mastriano, also announcing that he will not be running. And amongst the potential bid here, you have Stacey Garrity, the Pennsylvania state treasurer, who is the only position elected statewide who is potentially considering this bid, Carla Sands, who ran for Senate back in 2022, and a former United States representative. None of the other Republicans in Congress want to run against want to run against Bob Casey because they know how popular he is in this state. So Talking about this in Pennsylvania, it's a similar story to what we've seen in Wisconsin. I made a video about this just about a week ago, talking about how Republicans couldn't seem to convince any of their mainstream candidates to run in this race. Of those who have declined, many of them have opted to run for re-election or have simply just said that they don't want to end up in the United States Senate, which is a cop-out answer when you're asked by the press, which essentially says, I know I would lose this race. Tammy Baldwin in the state of Wisconsin is a very popular senator, similar to Bob Casey in the essence of popularity, but does not have a political dynasty, but is very much of high prestige within the state of Wisconsin, has strong election results similar to his performance back in 2018. Tammy Baldwin also won by double digits. In 2012, she defeated her Republican opponent, the former governor of Wisconsin, who at the time also, or not governor of Wisconsin, oh yes, governor of Wisconsin, but not at the time. He was a former popular governor. About 10 years later, he decided to run for Senate, but his favorabilities were through the roof. I mean, he was doing a lot better than many other candidates, and Tammy Baldwin came into this race, not exactly someone who was well positioned for the general election to the extent that she was in 2018. I mean, it was still a very competitive race. Paul Ryan hailed from the state of Wisconsin, so her election performance shows that, one, she can win in a competitive race, can run up the margins when the numbers are favorable, when the circumstances are favorable, and, took a Trump state and made it very, very blue. And now in 2024, Republicans don't even dare. I mean, quite literally all of the candidates that were the Republican hopefuls, as they were described here, as people that the Republicans were actively encouraging. Mike Gallagher met with Mitch McConnell, met with many top Republicans. This was the hopeful here for the Republican Party. Then came Tom Tiffany. Republicans also really wanted him to run as well. You saw mainstream Republicans coming in, pushing these candidates to run, very similar to how Donald Trump did with many of his candidates back in 2022. And ultimately, they said the math doesn't make sense. They're better off in the United States Congress, or in the House of Representatives. It doesn't make sense for them to go up against a very popular incumbent. So who's left here? We have one declared candidate who is just a chairman of the college Republicans. If he was to be nominated, would probably get around 40% of the vote. And then you also have David Clark, who some people think would be a good candidate. If you look anything into his history, you would know immediately that he's way too right-wing to actually win this race, and also just has a lot of baggage. I don't think that he would come close to winning. And then also just looking at the potential list here, not that many people, right? You have Trump's chief of staff, former U.S. representatives. You have a Fox News host. You don't really have top-tier candidates from a state that currently has the majority of its delegation being Republicans, and plenty of people from the bench that could have done it that have already declined. Now we're moving over to the next state, Michigan, the third part of the blue wall that we talk about here. We say Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Michigan now being the state we are, talking about. We have Debbie Stabenow, who in 2018 won by roughly 7 points, which wasn't as strong as, Bob Casey in 2018, wasn't as strong as Tammy Baldwin in 2018, but was still an impressive victory, given that John James is a strong candidate when it comes down, to congressional races. So John James ran in 2020 and lost by around 1.2%, 1.6%, somewhere around there. Had a very phenomenal election performance given that Donald Trump had lost the state by roughly 3 points. So it puts 2018 a bit more into perspective, but Debbie Stabenow isn't running, which at face value might seem, okay, that's bad news for Democrats. And initially it was, until you looked at all of the statewide elected positions, all of the sitting U.S. House of Representatives members, and then you realized there is a very long list Democrats can pull from, many of which who have openly declined, largely because many of them are going to seek a future office, whether that's Jocelyn Benson, who's widely expected to pursue the governor's race in 2026, whether that's the lieutenant governor, who is also expected to pursue the governor's race, whether it's the attorney general, who just recently was reelected, propped up to national recognition, whether it's all of the U.S. representatives. They aren't declining because they don't think this race is going to win. They're declining because strong candidates have already entered into the race, and none more influential than Elisa Slotkin, U.S. Representative for Michigan's 7th District. And for a bit of history around her district, it has a Cook PVI of Republican +2. In 2016, voted for President Trump. In 2020, voted for Joe Biden by just 1 percentage point. In the 2020 Senate race, voted for John James. The point being, this is a purple district. For many of these other candidates, they won either statewide or in bluer districts than Elisa Slotkin's. And she also comes across to many as a fighter. She's a centrist. She definitely is way more towards the center than many of the other candidates on the Democratic side, which is why some progressives have refused to announce that they are either not going to run or their support for Elisa Slotkin. But she's reeling in a lot of major endorsements, whether it's mayors of major cities like Pontiac and Lansing, whether it's influential figures across the state, when that comes down to cabinet officials, it comes down to U.S. representatives, when it comes down to former governors. She's pulling in bigger names, whereas everybody else really is not. Barack Obama said he won't endorse. Debbie Stabenow said she won't endorse. So some of these more hard-hitting names that should be in this race have ultimately decided to back out, because they know Elisa Slotkin will be the nominee. So what does this have to do with Democrats locking down the blue wall? For starters, if Elisa Slotkin wins, she is a swing district Democrat. Regardless of how she may vote or not vote with the Democratic Party, she knows what it takes to win. She has done this before. She has ran in red districts, and she gets it. On the Republican side, this is where I start to see why, no matter practically who the Democratic nominee is, as long as they're somewhat strong, they are on track for victory. For one, this is a Biden state. This is a Whitmer state. She won in 2018 by double digits. She won in 2022 by more, right? The Democrats recently flipped the state House and the state Senate for the first time in 40 years. Very well positioned. Democrats are in a very, very strong point. But keep in mind, Virginia in 2020 went to Joe Biden by 10 points. Then the next election went to the Republicans by 2 points. So it's not a perfect science. But it is to say that in most circumstances, because none of these candidates are Glenn Youngkin type, that the Democratic Party is in a very good position. The main candidate who seems to be expressing interest, because the rest of them are no names, and many of those who have declined, again, similar story as Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, were fielded by mainstream candidates, people that are, the Republicans really, really wanted to get in the Senate race because they felt as if they were very strong candidates. People like John James, who was recently elected to the United States Congress in Michigan's 10th district. His Cook PVI here is Republican +3. A 1 point more Republican district. A Republican won here, John James, after losing in 2018, losing in 2020. Now onto Congress here. We know that he can win in competitive districts, but refusing to run here. Tudor Dixon also refusing to run. Tom Barrett also, refused to run here, decided to run for Elisa Slotkin's race because she's out, so he's going to go after it, right? So, that is the very, very telling part. And when you look at the potential list, who is it? Former U.S. representatives, former attorney generals, ones who lost in 2018 for governor. Now, those who have publicly expressed interest, Peter Meijer, who was primaried in his race, lost despite Meijer being in every single town in the state of Michigan. And then you have the declared list and the announcement pending list comes down to James Craig, which is a bad candidate. James Craig was disqualified in 2022 because of the fact that he had fraudulent signatures when it came down to candidate verification and candidate qualification. James Craig is a candidate who was kicked off the ballot, booted off the ballot by the Michigan Board of Elections because he broke the rules, because he tried to cheat his way to being the nominee. So you have Republicans that do not have the best history in Michigan, namely James Craig. You also have candidates that just refuse to run in Wisconsin and candidates that are scrambling in Pennsylvania that bring back up the same arguments made against Dr. Oz about carpetbagging, about association with President Trump. I mean, Dave McCormick even ran an ad with an ad behind him that said, "Let's go, Brandon." You are not going to win over centrist voters by speaking to a euphemism about telling the President of the United States to F off, right? That is not, or to, say even F the President of the United States. I mean, these are things you don't do if you want to win swing voters. And guess what? Dave McCormick did it in a last-ditch effort to win over Republican primary voters. Clearly, it didn't work. And now it's baggage for a general election, even if they do clear the field. So across the board, across the 3 states that matter, you have so many swing states for the Democrats that they are defending, that everything has to go right for them to win the Senate in 2024. And so far, things are going in the right direction. Kari Lake is trying to announce in the state of Arizona. In Montana, Matt Rosendale is planning to run in the Senate race there. In Wisconsin, Republicans can't field any candidates. In Michigan, they have a failed candidate from 2022. In Pennsylvania, they have Dave McCormick, who is not nearly as strong as people think he is and has a lot of baggage that wasn't brought back up in the general election in 2022 because he didn't make it there. But we already know the opposition research is there. Donald Trump himself mocked Dave McCormick, called him weak, said that he's a liberal Republican. All you need is those ads against him, and if one Republican runs, you're siphoning away the vote, you're decreasing the enthusiasm around him, and come the general election, if Joe Biden is to win the state of Pennsylvania, with Bob Casey's popularity, he's got it, right? So you start to see why this is just the piece of the puzzle that Democrats need to win the Senate elections, and it's coming in perfectly. Should Matt Rosendale announce in Montana? Should Kari Lake announce in October? Both of which are expected to this fall. In Minnesota, they're not taking on Klobuchar, but in Wisconsin, there's no one to run. In Michigan, there's no one to run. In Pennsylvania, there's one person to run who has baggage, who won't take on Casey. And amongst all three, the strongest incumbent lands in Pennsylvania. Just so happens to be the one state that Republicans do, in fact, have a stronger nominee than they would potentially in Michigan and Wisconsin. And ultimately, the Democrats are locking it down. When you add that up, Democrats skyrocket from 43 to 48, bringing them down to a majority that will be decided by Ohio, Texas, and Nevada. Not West Virginia, but Ohio, Texas, and Nevada. Which means Republicans can even pick up West Virginia. They can even take that state, but they'll need to win all three of these. Or they'll need to win Ohio and Texas, which isn't too far off from the mark, but given the map that we're working with now, the Republican Party should be dominating. This should be an easy pickup because there has never been a map more favorable to the GOP than the 2024 Senate map, and yet somehow Democrats are holding out strong. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.